look at is in Lachim Perek Vav, and this is a description of how the Beit HaMikdash was built. And then there are three, in terms of this, there are other important references. This is going to be our starting point. The next chapter, Perek Zayin, describes the building of Shlomo's residence, his palace, which is also very interesting. And then the 8th chapter is description of like the installation of the Beit HaMikdash and bringing in the Aron, and there's some relevant things for our discussion there as well. And there are some parallels in Divrei Hayamim, which are also worth looking at, important to look at even. We might look at one of them today. I think I have it. Yeah, I already have the tab for that. So, okay, let's begin. Vayhi bishmonim shana v'arba'meot shana leit b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim b'shana haravi'it b'chodesh Ziv hu ha'chodesh hasheni l'moch Shlomo Yisrael vayiven habayit l'Hashem. Okay, it was the 480th year since the children of Israel left the land of Egypt. In the 4th year, in Chodesh Ziv, which is Iyar, Chodesh Hasheni, it's the 2nd month, to the reign of Shlomo on Israel, and he built the Bayit, right, which is the Beit HaMikdash. He built the house for Hashem. Okay. B'bayit asher banash b'hamelech Shlomo 60 ama arkov yasrim rachbo u'shoshim ama komato. So we looked at this pasuk at another shir. It gives us the dimensions of the Beit HaMikdash proper. What I mean by is, this is the Heichal and the Kodesh HaKodashim. And as we'll see in the next pasuk, it doesn't include the Ulam, which like the anteroom before you get into the Heichal, which we also saw in Bayit Sheni. A lot what is described about Bayit Sheni has precedent in Bayit Rishon. So the house that Shlomo built for Hashem was 60 amma in length, 20 presumably amma in width, and 30 high. So one of the things we pointed out is that this doesn't give us this doesn't tell us where the measurements are taking place, but as we'll see from later on, in other words, is this inside the building or the outside measurement? Okay. We'll see later on that it seems to be that this is a description of the inside of the building. And then if we wanted to know the outside measurements, we'd have to add in the walls. והאולם על פני היכל הבית 20 אמה אורכו, על פני רוחב הבית 10 באמה רוחבו על פני הבית. So there's this ulam, that's on the face of the heichal of the house. It's 20 amma wide, so it's the same width. Here's Michael Werner. It's the same as the heichal and the Kodesh HaKodashim. And it's 10 amot wide on the face of the bayit. So, here, so now we have both Michael and Paul. Hello. So what we are doing, I just want to make sure Paul's also connected. Yeah. Paul, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Yes. Okay. Hi.
Okay. Hi. So you and Michael Werner just came. We already started, but we haven't gotten very far. We're looking at the sixth chapter of Malachim Aleph, and this is a description of the building of Bayit Rishon. So what we just what we looked at is we saw Pasuk Bet, which is a pasuk that we looked at in the shiur, and it tells us that the measurements of the Heichal and the Kodesh HaKodeshim together were 60 amot long and 20 amot wide and 30 amot high. And we, as we'll see from later on, those seem to be our measurements, not the outside measurements. The outside measurements include the thickness of the walls. So we have 40 amot for the, so we have 40 by 20 for the Heichal, and we have 20 by 20 for the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and the whole building is 30 amot tall. Now, I mentioned also before you came, there's parallels to this, to these passages in Divrei Hayamim, which seem to contradict some of these measures. We will get to them eventually, but not probably tonight. So then the front of the Heichal, in front of the Heichal, we have the Ulam. So the Ulam is like an anteroom before you get in Beit HaMikdash. And I believe in more than one shiur that we've done in the past, I've shown you from drawings of Bayit Sheni that also had an Ulam. To mention Masachet Midot, it was part of also part of Bayit Sheni. So there's this anteroom, the Ulam, that's on the face of the Heichal, and it's 20 amot long on the width, on the face of the width of the house. In other words, so we're giving its length. Now, when we the length of the Bayit, we were going east to west. When we're talking about the length of the Ulam, we're going north to south, because length is whatever side is longer is the length, right? So we're placing this north out. It's 20 amot, so it's the same width as the Bayit. The Bayit is, again, the Heichal and the Kodesh, and it's 10 amot wide, right? Presumably also these are the inner measurements. Vayas abayit chalonei shkufim atumim. They made for the house windows that were shkufim atumim. So the way Chazal understood, if you translate this in modern Hebrew, it sounds like a contradiction, right? It sounds like a moron, that they were shkufim means transparent and atumim means opaque, but that's not what they mean. Shkufim, we're not going to go into this now, but the way Chazal understood this is that they were wide inside and they were narrow, leading to a slit on the outside of wall. It's not so important right now for our discussion, so I'm gonna leave it at that. Vayiven al kir habayit yatzia saviv et bayit saviv le'echal v'advir hayat saviv. So this is describing yatzia. How do they translate that? They say a side structure. Okay, and around the Hal and the Beit HaMikdash, we have other chambers that are being built out. We'll describe them to some degree. And again, I'm not going to go into great detail. You have to imagine that if you're facing the front of the Beit HaMikdash, so you'll see the Ulam, and then you'll see on the sides these other areas, these other parts of the building that are projecting outward. So these are not part of the measurement right? We're starting with the initial measurement of 60 by 20, right? That's the Beit HaMikdash proper. And then in front of it, we have the Ulam, and on either side, we're going to have what the Mishnah calls ta'im, right? There'll be other chambers. The bottom Yatzia, there's a bottom appendage, 5 chamesh ba'ama rachba. It's 5 amot wide. Hatichona, the middle one. There were 3 levels that are attached to 3 sides of the Beit HaMikdash, because they'll be both on the north, the south, on the west, behind the Kodesh HaKodeshim. They go all the way around. The middle one is 6. It's 1 amma wider. It's 1 more, right? So they're staggered, or not, I don't know if that's the right word, but they're going up like this. They go 5, 6, 7. It's because there were migraot. So migraot is I don't know, how do they translate it? It's from the word gara, which means actually to subtract. The idea is that sticking the side of the walls of the Mikdash, on the bottom, it sticks out essentially 2 amot. And then on the next level, it's on 1 amma, and on the top level, it's not sticking out at all. So if you look from the side, you're going to have, from each side of the Beit Dash, you'll see that are going out 7 amot. But if you were actually to enter them, that the bottom level is only 5 amot wide, because there's 2 amot that are built onto the side of the Beit HaMikdash. That's solid. And the second level, there'll be 1 amma that's solid, that's built into the Beit HaMikdash. And the top level, it would just go right into the Beit HaMikdash. And it says, the Bilti Achos B'kirot Habayit, so that it would not, in other words, these chambers actually holding on to or attached directly to the Beit HaMikdash. The idea is that they're supposed to be able to stand without cutting in at all into the Beit HaMikdash. And we'll see why that was chosen. House in its building was built from whole stone. And Eben Masad presumably is a stone that, from the word linsoa, right? It had to be transported. The Targum here gives it a different spin. Just a second. Right. But B'it b'nyute avnin shemin matkas itbanei. The Radak here explains this. This is the Radak on the pasuk. He says, "Eben shlema masanivne kamoshi hisiu otan min hahar." They were built with whole stone, the way as they were transported from the mountain quarry, where they were quarried. V'sham hayu poslin otan b'midot gazit. There, that's where they carved them, right? That's where they made the carved stone that was made somewhat outside of Jerusalem at a quarry. Once the stones were brought to the Beit HaMikdash, they didn't cut or carve any of them. They were built as whole stones, the way they were brought from the mountain. So this, I'm going to go in a little bit detail on certain things, even if they're not immediately relevant, but I think they're interesting. They may have heard or learned at other times. I think they're just worth pointing out. right? So according to certain Deot and Chazal that are brought down in the Gemara, even at the quarry, they were not buried using iron implements, ela b'tolah, right? They were cut with a worm, b'tolah chata, nikra shamir. They had a shamir, they had, or apparently a bunch of these shmirim. They would put them on, and they would split the stone, open up in front, before them as they were, I guess, digging into the stone. So the idea being, presumably, that even the stones of the Beit HaMikdash were never touched by implements. I haven't looked into this. I wanted to take the time to see if anybody had any theories about this, but it's a nice idea. It doesn't sound completely crazy to me, because the idea would be, if depending on the, and I don't know enough to say anything authoritative about this, but stone will split along certain lines, I guess, naturally, depending on the stone and depending how it's. So maybe all you need is something to get in there to open up the crack. I don't know, but it's a very interesting idea.
It's also
yeah, go ahead.
It's also worth noting that Jerusalem itself is on a layer of limestone that's above a layer of granite. And if you look at the naturally occurring limestone around Jerusalem, it's riddled with holes, and like tiny little holes that look as if they're made by worms.
Oh, interesting. Oh, very good observation. The advantage of living in Jerusalem. So
the things that we never figure out living in Babel.
Shamir means Rahu, right? The Shamir was like acorn. In other words, it was a tiny worm. But the way they described the way this was done, put this into a lead. They would put it into the lead tube, malay mulchin, that was full of mulchin, like it would be like it would be like bunched up wool or cotton, umalei subin, and it was filled up, with like bran, right? So that's taking up most of the space in this tube. No afilo al hahar, and if you put it even on the mountain, or it's even on an actual mountain, it would actually split the mountain. This is what Shlomo used to split all of the stones for the Beit HaMikdash. And he goes into a little bit more detail here. Who brought him this shamir? An eagle brought it, right? When it talks in the previous chapter here about Shlomo's wisdom, which there in context sounds like he was able to communicate with animals and with fowl. Ma diber, did he talk about with the fowl? Sha'alo hechana shamir kavua. He asked him, where is this shamir? So the Nesher won him the shamir from Gan Eden. This is one of the things that the Kadosh Baruch Hu made in this world, where that which is soft actually has dominion over that which is hard, right? Which is counterintuitive. This is also the shamir that Moshe used to cut the stones for the ephod, shel mishkan. That was part of the clothing that the Kohen Gadol wore in the Mishkan. Ubo pasal et haluchot harishonot. It's also what he used to cut the stone luchot achronot, and for the second round of tablets. This is a tradition that Chazal had from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, vein lahaher acharav. You shouldn't question this, right? Literally, you shouldn't wonder or think about it. Right? This
But
is a solid.
of course, the implication is that if it needs to tell us, don't wonder about this, of course, we inevitably do.
Right. It's like if somebody tells you not to think about the purple, to think about a purple cow, that's all you can think about. There's studies been done about this, but just as a note, I mean, it's interesting you say that because, you know, of course, the classic example of that doesn't make any rational sense is aduma, right? And there also, it's Chazal say it's a chok, and a chok means that this is like a gzerat melech. This is something that Kadosh Baruch Hu decreed, and we don't know the reason for it. But from that time on, you know, throughout history, Rabbanim got the reason for the para, and there are endless perushim about para. Anyway, this was a bit of a. I want to get on, but okay. But the reasons I did want to emphasize this is here. So in pasuk, when we say in pasuk zayin abayit v'yibanatol even shlema masan nivneh makavod v'garzen kol kli varzel lo nishma b'bayit v'hibanoto. All right, so like the hammers or cutting tools, any that were made of iron, were not heard at the Beit Hamikdash when it was being built. So the actual building of the Beit Hamikdash involved using these whole stones, echshaloyeh, right? These were whole stones, and there were no iron implements that were used that would be needed to fit into place. So obviously there would have been an enormous amount of planning to make sure that all the stones are of a certain size, that they're going to fit right into the places they need to fit into. And so this is apparently related to the previous pasuk, where it talks about these the Yitzia, these ta'im that are on the surrounding the Beit Hamikdash. They can't cut into the stone to attach these side chambers, and so what they do for support is they build out apparently next to the Mikdash, but without damaging any of the stones. They build out these levels so that when they, like, imagine, let's say the bottom one is 5 wide, and then you're going to have to make a ceiling for it. So where is the ceiling going to rest? You can't put the cross beams into the Beit HaMikdash itself. So what do? So they build out 2 amot, and then they can put the cross beams there on the 2 amot, and then they build out another amah from, one more amah from. They can put the cross beams for the second one on top of that without ever having to go into the wall of the Beit HaMikdash. And the top one, they can put the cross beams apparently on top of the Beit HaMikdash itself, but again, without cutting into the Beit HaMikdash.
Were there stairs to get up to the second and the third floor?
Funny you should ask. That's so. פתח הצלע התיכונה אל כתף הבית הימנית, ובלולים יעלו על התיכונה, ומתיכונה על השלישים. There are a couple of ways of reading this pasuk, but one way of reading it, Petach Hatzela, it's Milora Hatzela. The opening, it sounds the opening of the side, that's to the shoulder of the right shoulder of the house. The right here is the south. That is The idea is that your point of view is not as if you would be walking into the Beit HaMikdash, but the Beit HaMikdash's point of view, as it were, which is facing out from west to east. So if it's going from west to east, then its right is going to be south and its left is going to be north. So the opening for the middle tzelah, so there are different pshatim here, but hatichona, according to the one pshat, now here isn't the middle going up, it's the middle from the south side. If you're facing the south side, there are actually 5 chambers, and the middle one, the third one, has an opening. And uvelulim ya'alu al tichona, and they would go up in lulim. So lulim, in short, are apparently spiral staircases, where they're like small chambers that have within them a spiral staircase. That's also the, here we can look at the Radah, Katef Habayit. Well, here I'll show you also the Targum. The Targum says Tar'ad Mechitzata, the opening of the Mechitzata Arita. He says Mechitza Arit, the ground floor chamber is what he means. Petiach li'ibar Beit HaMimina. It's open to the right side of the Beit HaMikdash. Bim Sibata Salkin. They went up in some kind of a circular thing, right? Which is similar to Hebrew. Minarita li'ilita ve'orach mitziata. They would go up from the ground floor to the top floor by way of the floor. That's the way the Targum understands this pasuk. Go from the middle. It would go. This is the way he's saying, right? They go up in these spiral staircases. Al hatichona. They would go up to the middle. Here, tichona means the middle floor, and from the middle floor to the third floor. Vayiven et habayit vayichalehu, and he built us, and he finished it. Vayispon et habayit gevim usteirot barazim, and he ceiling for the house of gevim, which it's not 100% clear. It's some kind of a beam, presumably. The word gevim, which appears elsewhere, actually means like a little. What do you call it? Like a little stream of water, but like just like the way water might go into like a little furrow into the ground. So apparently refers to something that goes across. I'll put it that way. Sterot here is with a sin, but it's the same as like with the sam of something that's misudar. This is where also the idea of sterot that we have in modern Hebrew for like a boulevard is from that word, the same idea, something that's sort of straight and laid out. So whatever the actual construction is, I don't think we know, but it's that there were, beams, maybe beams and cross beams. So Sia, which has these chambers, goes all the way around the Beit HaMikdash, in other words, from 3 sides, from south, west, north, and it holds onto the Beit HaMikdash with cedar wood. Exactly how it was attached, it's not unclear to me, but again, we don't have to get into that. Hashem. Okay, so this, what we have until now, these first 10 psukim, we have this basic idea of the building itself, and it starts from the inside out. We start from what's called the Beit HaMikdash proper, which includes the Hechal and the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Then we talk about the Ulam, and then we talk about the Yetzia that goes all the way around. So this is the Musar part, which is very important. Hashem tells Shlomo, "Habayit hazeh asher taboneh, in telech v'chukotai et mishpatai ta'aseh, v'shamarta et kol mitzvotai lalechet bahem, v'akimoti dvari itach, asher dibarti al David avicha." Okay, so if you follow my rules, this house, if you follow my rules and you go according to my judgments and you keep all of mitzvot to follow them, I will fulfill my word with you that I spoke to David, your father. V'shachanti b'toch b'nei Yisrael v'lo ez mi Yisrael. And I will dwell amongst the children of Israel. That is, the Beit HaMikdash, it's not just that Hashem in the Beit HaMikdash, but through the building of the Beit HaMikdash, the Shekhinah dwell in Israel. Notice, by the way, the word Shekhinah never appears in Tanakh, but it's from this idea of Shechanti, which we also have in Chumash. Below Israel, and I will not leave, I will not abandon my people Israel. So Shlomo built the house and he finished it. Vayiven et kirot habayit mibayta bitzalot arazim mikarka bayit ad kirot hasipun tzipa eitz mibayit veyitzaf et karka habayit bitzalot broshim. Builds the walls of the house mibayta from outside with tzalot arazim, with sides are, pieces of cedar from the floor to the ceiling. Tzipa eitz mibayit. He covered it with wood from without. Vayitzav et karka habayit b'tzalot broshim. And then he took broshim, which are, can't remember what kind of wood that is, cypress or fir, right? Then the floor broshim. Vayiven et esrim ama miyaktei habayit b'tzalot arazim min hakarka ad hakirot. Vayiven lo mibayit ledvirash hakodashim. So builds 20 amot from the sides of the house with tzalot arazim. How does he translate? Yeah, tzela is a side or a rib, but how do they? He just says boards. Okay, boards of steel from the floor until the ceiling. But even though lidvir, he built from inside the dvir. What I said before, means from inside. I'm mixing up terminology here. Everything that was described before, even kirot habayit mibayit b'tzalot tzipa eitz mibayit. It's talking about what was done inside. Inside, that's everything. So in other words, the Beit per se is built from stone. And then inside, it's going to get covered with this layer. It's going to be paneled, essentially, with wood on the sides and on the floor and on the ceiling. It's going to all be. Even Imam Yaktei Habayit is going to build. He built 20 amot from the sides of the house with cedar boards, meaning karka adakirot. But even though mibayit lidvir kodashim, he built it for inside of, in other words, past the dvir for the kodesh kodashim. So the dvir once again is this wall that separates the heichal from the kodesh. So there's going to be some differences between what happens in the heichal and what happens in the kodesh kodashim. One thing that occurs to me actually just now as we're going over it, because the measurements here are going to be very important. So we started off by saying that the bayit is 60 by 20. And we we'll see there are from here going to see that those were the inner measurements, as I mentioned before. It just occurs to me now, though, that those measurements presumably would have been the measurements before the wood is put in. The wood is going to have a certain thickness, which is going to take away the inner measurement. I didn't see anybody mention this, so just bear that. I'm just throwing that out there. You'll see why it's important.
It also occurs to me that means that the innermost layer of the Mishkan also was of cedar. It was also of cedar planks.
Was of cedar, not bro. It was not broshim.
It was.
No.
I thought it was. Shittim, right?
It's atay shittim. It's acacia wood.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Broshim is it's not an uncommon. You're right. It's not an uncommon wood to get. They got these things from the north. Described later on. These things, a lot of them come from Lebanon. They come from Lebanon. So here now it says it explicitly that the bayit, that is that which is the heichal lifnai, meaning in front of, it's going to be in front of the in front of the dvir, in front of the kodashim. It's 40 amot. So it's 4 amot in length. The erez al habayit pnima, siklat pkaim ufturei tzitzim hakol erez ein even nira. Right, so there's cedar el habayit that's put on the house. In other words, what we just described as the heichal. It's covered with cedar. That's miklat kaim. It's carved with knobs or bulbs. It has like these nice carvings on ufturei tzitzim and open flowers. Open it's like bulbs and open flowers design. Everything is cedar. You can't see any. No stone is seen. So it's completely covering. The stone is not seen at all from the Udvir betoch habayit mipnim ha'hechin l'titen sham et aron brit Hashem. The dvir here seems to refer to the whole area of the Kodesh HaKodeshim, but in virtually every other place that I found, dvir always means the wall that's in front of the Kodesh HaKodeshim. You could also maybe read it like that, but the Targum translates Uveit Kapori Migo Beita, right? The Beit Kippurim, right, which would be the Kodesh HaKodeshim. What he's calling, that's how he's translating the word dvir, the actual place of the Kodesh HaKodeshim. All right, in any event, we have 40 and we know it's by 20. We have 40 by tal. It's completely covered with cedar. All of the walls are completely covered with cedar. You can't see any stone. Now the dvir betoch habayit mipnima hichin, the dvir that's inside of, or in other words, just past the heichal, that's inside, that's further in, he prepared the titain shamet aron brit Hashem. I was prepared to put the aron. Lifnei hadvir, in front of the dvir, esrim ama orech, esrim ama rochav, esrim ama komato. So this is a very important point, which we'll come back to. So in front of the dvir, there's a length of 20 and a width of 20. Right, so now we have our full 60 by 20. We have the 40 for the heichal, and we have the 20, the Kodesh HaKodeshim, but esrim amot komato, it's 20 amot in height, Vayitzapehu zahav sagur. It was completely covered with gold. Vayitzaf mizbeach aretz, and the mizbeach was covered with cedar. So the first thing that we need to note here, does anybody notice something amiss with the measurements? It's 20, the Kodesh HaKodeshim is 20 by 20 by 20. What did we say earlier?
Oh, so the height of the building itself is 30.
Is 30. So what happened to these 10 amot? It said the whole thing was 30 in height. So why is this 20 in height? Okay. This is going to be a major point that we'll revisit, that we're going to have to come back to. But right now, it's not clear. It's not clear what happened to the extra 10 amot. Saf Shlomo Tabai Penima Mipnima Zahav Sagur. Right, so he covers the inside the house. Presumably the Heichal is also now covered with gold. Vayaber Baratukot Zahav Lifnei Hadvir. Vayitzapehu Zahav, and he put across Ratukot. Those are supposed to be like chain-like things that go in front of the dvir. And he covers this also with gold. That kol habayit tzipa zahav ad tom kol habayit. So the house is covered with gold until the entire, right, until it's completely covered. The kol hamizbeach asher advir tzipa zahav. And all of the mizbeach that's here apparently you have to understand it toward the dvir. The mizbeach is not it's not past the dvir, it's going to be in front of the dvir, in front of this wall. There'll be a mizbeach, which is also going to be gold. That's, of course, the mizbeach hazahav that's described in the Torah.
So what is covered with the cedar wood and what is covered with gold? I don't understand what's going on.
So, okay, so apparently all of the walls get covered with cedar, but then apparently because of the order in which it's brought, apparently the next step was to cover everything inside of the Kodesh HaKodeshim with gold, and then to cover everything inside of the Heichal in gold. So everything gets covered in gold. In other words, you don't see now any wood. All you're going to see is this gold sheeting over or gold leaf, however they did it, on top of the wood. So you don't actually see the wood. You're going to see gold everywhere.
But they say the wood has decorations with the flowers, right, and
yeah.
And all those painted with gold or something.
I mean,
presumably they
if they're good using gold leaf, that shouldn't be a problem.
Right. Actually, there's going to be a pasuk here that describes this, that they would beat the gold into the shapes, over the shapes. Right. Gold. One of the reasons, arguably, that gold became such a widely desired material is, in fact, for a couple of obvious reasons. One of them is it doesn't tarnish, right? It always maintains its color. And one of the other things is it can be beaten to extremely thin sheets and still be a solid piece, still be one piece, right? And that's what gold leaf. So how thick the gold was, it didn't have to be very thick. You can cover this gold by beating it on. However it was they did this. I discussed this once with somebody who was actually an expert in materials, who also knew a lot about Tanakh. I think that's the way he understood it, although there are some places where it seems that sometimes gold was attached with nails. that they would also like have like sheets of gold that would be attached by nails. But anyway, everything gets covered in gold. The bite is covered with gold until it's covered. We call them mizbeach, etc. We just did that. Now, vayas badvir shnei chruvim atzei shamen eser ad kol matot. Now, it's going to describe here the kruvim. So the way the kruvim are in Bayit Rishon are not like they're described in Shmot, right? The way they're described in Shmot, you have two kruvim that are on top of the kaporet. So remember, the aron is essentially an open box, and then on top of that, there's a flat board, which is the kaporet, which is covered gold, and the aron is also covered with gold. Actually, according to the result, it was like three boxes, one inside the other. There was like a gold box, a box, and a gold box, and then the kaporet is on top, and it's covered with gold. And the kruvim are beaten out of gold that's on the kaporet. So they rest on top of the kaporet. You're going to see here the kruvim are not part of the kaporet. They're huge. They're quite large. They made in the badvir, here dvir again apparently means the room of the Kodesh HaKodashim, two kruvim of wood. So there are different opinions about what atzei shaman are. Targum says ae zeta, right? Atzei shitim, right? That, which would make sense, right? Because we get a lot of oil from from olive trees, so we could. That's what people call atzei shaman. But actually, the Radak points out that it doesn't seem to be the case, because there's a pasuk later on, not here, in Sefer Ezra. We call Sefer Ezra, we call Sefer Nehemiah. He says, I'll just read this from the beginning so you get the whole context. Atzei shamen targuma zeta. The Targum says that they're atzei zeitim. Ve'en lishol ech shichet me'atzei ma'achal. Right, so there's an isra. You're not allowed to destroy fruit trees. And actually, if you remember, when we learned in Masechet, we talked about the kinds of wood they would bring for the Ma'arechet, because in principle, you're not allowed to bring from fruit trees. So he says, okay, so you shouldn't ask, well, how could they bring from fruit trees, from zaitim? How would you bring from food trees for this work? Could be that they cut the very old, cut down the old olive trees, that are already no longer producing fruit. Similarly, the wood that was brought to the ma'aracha to burn on the mizbeach, right? Like we saw in the Mishnah, that it says that they would use fig wood and palm. Right? Just like Chazal explained how they could use for burning on the mizbeach. So similarly here, you could also say that if in fact this is atzei zeitim, they were trees that were no longer producing fruit. But then he says, this seems to be actually a little more plausible. That maybe we're talking here not about a fruit tree, but from a type of cedar tree that's called eitz shemen. a kind of oil comes out of it that's used for making tar. Lefikach nikra eitz shemen, and that's why it's called eitz shemen, not because it has fruit that produces oil, but because you actually get a kind of oil from the tree. And he says, "Ki nematzana be'Ezra." We see in Sefer Ezra in Middle Ages, Ezra and Nehemiah are considered as one book. So he says, you see in Sefer Ezra, which we actually see in Sefer Nehemiah, Suhu ha'ara ve'evil alei zayid ve'alei eitz shemen. Right, this is for building Sukkot. It says, go and bring branches from zayid and branches from eitz shemen. Nimtza eitz shemen eino eitz zayid. Since he says that you have to bring from eitz zayid and eitz shemen, presumably they're not the same tree. He wouldn't just be repeating himself. It's not a poetic thing.
So there really is a kind of tree called a pitch pine that actually is very resinous. I mean, it does make kind of oily resin, and that's what people used to use to make torches, because it was
it had like built-in fuel.
Basically, yes. Or it is built-in fuel. It means that it wouldn't all burn up all at once, but sort of smolder. And
right.
it'd be
so
very
here,
durable. It wouldn't all burn up once, but it makes sort of smolder. So it's very good for a torch. And then also, I think the resin could be extracted.
Presumably, and here, yeah, I didn't actually go into you make it. You know, it makes sense to me, right? That you could have this. So that's what the red does. Anyway, again, a little bit of a side note, but interesting, because this eitz shemen is going to come up in other places. So vayas v'dreshne kruvim atzei shaman. So the kruvim themselves are made from this eitz shemen, and they were 10 amot high. Eser amot to. It actually goes from the plural shnei kruvim and says eser amot kamoto. Its height was 10. V'chamesh amot knaf hakruv, v'chamesh amot knaf hakruv hashenit. Eser amot miktzot knafav yad ktzot knafav. So let's take this in the simplest way, or what I think simplest way possible. So the wing of one kruv was 5 amot. Chamesh amot kanaf kruv ha'echat. Echad here would refer back to the knaf. That the one wing of the kruv was 5, and the second wing of the kruv was 5. So there were 10 amot from one end of its wing, the other to the end of its wings. It was 10 side to side. So what does that tell you about the wings? That the wings also met in the middle. It wasn't a single wing, but it was wings that would be meeting in the middle, presumably. That would be the simplest understanding of it, that the wings go above the body, and they actually, the beginning of the wing, the katzeh of the wing, let's say, would be just above the middle, in between the shoulder blades, and then you would count 5 amot to each side, and that would be 10 amot wide. Okay, and bearing in mind, we're dealing with it's only 20 amot by 20 amot. So what happens? There's also 10 amot for the second kruv. There was one measurement and one shape for both of the kruvim. So they're both built the same. They both have a wingspan amot. So now where are they standing inside Shekadashim? Kruv ha'echad eser ba'ama. It goes back, it repeats the height of one kruv was v'chein ha'kruv ha'sheni, right? So each of them are 10 amot high. So each are 10 amot high, have wingspans of 10. Vayitenet ha'kruvim betoch ha'bayit ha'pnimi, and Shlomo put the kruvim inside the inner house, the Kodashim, Vayifresu kanfei hakruvim, and they spread out the wings of the kruvim. Vatiga knaf ha'echad bakir, uchnaf hakruv hasheni nogat bakir hasheni. V'chanfehem el toch nogot kanaf el kanaf. So one wing, in other words, the tip of one wing touches a wall, and the tip of the other kruv touches the opposite wall. I'm adding in the opposite, or presumably. And kanfehem al toch habayit, the knafim that are going inside, toward the inside of the house or inner, nogot kanaf el kanaf. Things are touching one another. So speaking, 1 second.
Shell,
Yeah.
I ask myself, how would they carve those statues out of wood without using iron knives or something like this?
That's a good question.
And you are not allowed. I think that if you are not allowed to use it for the stones, so probably you are not allowed to use it for
okay, but so
this is true also for the decoration on the walls. It's the same problem.
Well, actually, the decoration on no, okay. So wait a second. So it's an interesting question that you're raising.
I never thought about it.
No, it's a very interesting question you're raising. It could be that they did use. In other words, it doesn't say anything about not using iron implements for the carvings.
Yes, they say only about the stones, but maybe,
now well, no. In other words, no. But you're raising. It's a completely reasonable question. Like, why not also? Maybe also for the wood, and if it was also true for the wood, they have done it. But presumably, there's a relationship though between the stones of the Beit HaMikdash and the stones of the Mizbeach, where the Torah specifically says, "Lo tanif alehem barzel," right? So the stone. There's something about putting metal to stone that's particularly problematic. I haven't seen anybody talk about this question that you're asking. If I do find something, I will. In the meantime, I think we just have to assume that they must have done the carving, and maybe they also did the carving outside of the temple area, because even though it wouldn't make this kind of noise as like a blood hitting stone, but still maybe it was done outside. In terms of getting the gold onto the wood and even over the design, that could all be done by a wooden burnisher or a stone burnisher. I have one here. This is an agate burnisher. This is used for burnishing. I use it for a lot of things, but it's designed for burnishing gold leaf onto parchment or paper, whatever you want to burnish it onto. By the way, in order to burn it, so I'm sure there are people who've studied about this. Just as a technical matter, the way we get gold leaf onto, let's say, parchment, we don't put it straight. It has to stick to something. So you put on what's called size or sizing, which is essentially a kind of a very mildly sticky. It's not very, very sticky. It's like a mildly sticky substance. And you put the sizing down in whatever shape you want the gold to be. So you can put it down, for example, I can make a letter using a quill or a steel pen or something like. I can also brush it on with a brush in whatever shape I want. You have to let it dry till it's just a little bit sticky. And then you start putting on layers of gold. You burnish it on top. So the gold that goes on, again, I don't know how they did it in the Beit HaMikdash, but it didn't have to be like a single sheet. It could have been many sheets of finely pounded out gold that were burnished on. And and what they use to burnish it, or maybe the nature of cedar wood is that it didn't need any extra glue. I don't know. Anyway, let's pretend that what we're looking at here is the Kodesh HaKodashim, and let's say it's 20 wide, right? It's 20 from one side to the other. And we're not going to worry about the height right now. Let's just pretend that this is the 10 amma high. This is obviously not to scale, but let's.
You are looking from above or from the side?
So this is the side look. If you were to enter, you'd be looking at this from the side.
Okay.
Okay, and let's make. So now we have the wingspan of the two kruvim. Hold on a second. I'm going to use the straight line. Actually, let's try. I'm playing with the things here, but this might be helpful. All right, so let's say that's halfway, so that's like 10 amot. And then that's 10 amot.
This should be the wings of the kruvim?
Yes, so these are supposed to be the wings of the kruvim. Except that you would have to like separate them. Technically they're separate. But their edges touch each other. So that's why I drew it as a straight line, right? The ends of the wings touch each other, so that it goes continuously. From here is 5, and here's 5, and here's 5, and here's 5, and this wing touches what would be, if we're looking straight on from the entrance. So this would be the south side. I'll just take that away. Hold on. We'll just put south here and north here. So this would be the side, and this would be the north side, and they would go continuously all the way along. So now, one of the questions is, that's all well and good, but where exactly are the kruvim? So we're going to look, we're not going to have time today, but I think next week, hopefully, I will show you Sugya in Baba Batra, which talks about this, and this is again another concept that you may have heard. We'll look a little bit at it, I think, in the Radak today, that if you imagine, let's say, kruvim have some kind of a human-like look. So where would the wings come out of? So let's say those would come out of, let's say, the shoulder area, and then they go up. So if that's true, then there would be a space, like a noticeable space between the wings of the single kruv, right? Because they're going to come up from here and go out, right? So they wouldn't touch each other. And if they do touch each other, so where is the kruv? So this is something to ponder. This is something that we'll have to think about.
So I remember in picture, I think it's the bas-relief from the palace of Sargon, the Assyrian king Sargon II. The wings actually come out and go forward and project forward.
That would be more like the way
they were
the wings are in the Mishkan. Yes, right there. and people have all kinds of different ideas exactly how it looks, but there, yes, it doesn't say that the wings spread out. But here, these kruvim are they're distinct from the kruvim that were on the kaporet in the Mishkan. We're going to go into this.
On the floor. They're standing on the floor. Besides the Aron, I think, no, that's what I understand.
So presumably, like if we're reading, like without, beli chochmot, if we're looking at this, yes, they would be standing. Somehow their wings would be above them and meeting on top. Not impossible, right? It could be. And standing on the floor. But we do have to ask questions. And as we'll see, there are different opinions about the way this is laid out.
So, I mean, what happened to the original kaporet? We know that at the time building the Bayit Rishon, the Aron is still around. What happened to the kaporet?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. But what we see here, Belina, they'll try to find out the answers to that. There are discussions later on elsewhere, like in the Mishnah, about what happened to the Mishkan and so forth, and what the Aron. But in terms of what happened to the Kaporot per se, I don't know. Let's continue here. Okay. All right. So that's what we just read. So the kruvim are there. Vayitzafet kruvim zahav, and then the kruvim were covered with gold. V'kol kirot habayit mesav kala pituchei kruvim betimrot. All of the water around, they're carved out with carvings of kruvim. Right? They have carvings of kruvim on the walls. Betimrot, palms like tamar. Ufture tzitzim, these open blossoms. Newly feet sewn inside and outside. So exactly what that means, we don't have to get into, but again, it was heavily rated on the walls. That karka bayit tzipa zahav, the floor of the bayit is covered with gold. Lifnima v'lachritzan, outside. That petach hadvir, and this is also very important for us to understand. That petach hadvir, the opening of the dvir. So the dvir was not a solid wall; it had an opening. You had to be able to get from the heichal into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Now, when we learned the Mishnah, we remember that according to the Tanna Kama in Bayit Sheni, they didn't have a wall; they had two parochot, right? And Kohen would enter on the south side and walk between the parochot and come in on the north side. Here, and it presumably, okay, we'll come back to the Mishkan later. Here, we have an opening to the Dvir, shamen, right? So that it has doors made of this eitz shamen. Ha'ayel mezuzot chamishit. This is a very also obscure verse here. So he made doors of all wood. The lintel and doorposts were 5 sided. We're actually the ayil refer to the lintel. We would refer to the mashkof, and it's used. That word ayil is used elsewhere. It's also used Gil in his description of the Beit HaMikdash. The mezuzot, of course, would be the doorposts. The question is, what is this chamishit? What is this chamishit? So there are actually several different interpretations of this. Some of them are that ha'ayil mezuzot chamishit. Some Mefarshim put it all together and say that the ayil with the mezuzot was 5-sided, and one way of understanding that is that you have 2 straight mezuzot, and then the ayil would be, let's say, like 2 beams put it, at an angle. So you have 4 sides, and then with the floor, it's 5 sides. That's one way of understanding it. Another way of understanding is that the mezuzot somehow were 5-sided, either like this, like a pentangle almost, or it'd be a pentangle plus the top, or somehow they were curved in like in 5 sides. But actually, the simplest shot, which the Ralbag says, is Ayel Mizuzit. This was the 5th entrance that you would come to. In other words, this would be the 5th and final entrance from the beginning, from the time you would walk into the area of the temple through 4 other doors before you would get to this door. Anyway, an interesting point, not so for our discussion. The important thing is that there are these 2 doors that are part of the Dvir, that are built on into the Dvir, into this wall. Right, so these are also very fancily decorated. This Vayared, this is like Lashon, like Radid. They were like beaten or pressed into the Kruvim. The gold would have been pressed onto the design. This is where you get the idea about how the gold got on, pertinent to what Paul asked before, that the gold would have been laid on top, and then they did some kind of a burnishing to get the gold on top of the designs. How does he translate it? And he spread the gold upon the, he just says he spread the gold, but it's from this, which is a reasonable translation. Okay, so also for the opening of the Heichal, when you walk from the Ulam into the Heichal, there would also be doorposts that are made of Atzei Shemen, Me'et Revi'it, and according to the pshat that the Chamishit door, the doors into the entrance into the Heichal would be the 4th door. Then you have the 3rd one would be the Ulam. The 2nd door would be into the Ezrat Kohanim, and the 1st door would be into the Ezrat Yisrael. So it works out. Ushte daltot atzev roshim shnei tzlaim hadelet ha'achat glilim u'shnei klaim hadelet ha'shenit glilim. This is describing the doors into the Heichal. They were made from broshim, and 2 sides are shnei tzlaim. 2 sides of one door were glilim. So glilim sounds rolled up. It could be that it refers to the idea that they were folded doors. And if you remember, we learned, actually, pardon me, maybe we did. If you've ever learned Masechet Midot, there is this idea that when the door open into the Ulam, and then the doors that from the Ulam into the Heichal, the doors would be 10. Each door is 10 amot wide. You shouldn't quote me on that. I think it's, but no, they're each 5 wide. It's 10 amot. The entrance is 10 amot. Each of them is 5 wide. And according to one opinion in the Mishnah, the doors themselves were folded, and they would fold them in, and it would take up 2.5 on each side. And then the Heichal, you would walk in actually they came in from the Heichal. From the Heichal, they have doors that were similar that folded, and then the 5 door would fold into 2.5. So you had 2.5, 2.5, and then when the doors were open, it would cover the wall on each side of the entrance. Okay, so that's one pshat. Again, there are different pshatim here, but one of them is that they folded. One is that they had a design that was like waves, like rounded. That could have just been the design on the door, whatever. The kala kruvim v'timrot ufturei tzitzim. Okay, so again, they carve in these designs. Tahav miushar michuke. Miushar, the straight on that which was doubt. it's a reference according to the Radak. This is similar to what it said about the way they put the gold onto the doors of the onto the design of the doors of the Dvir. So similarly, something similar happened here. Take, let's say, a straight piece of gold and push it into the design of the door. But even at the Chatzir HaPnimit Shlosha Turei Gazit, so they built the inner yard. In other words, this is now outside of the Heichal. Shlosha Turei Gazit, there would be 3 rows of cut stone, the Kruto Arzim, and a line of cut cedar. Lashana HaRevi'it Yusad Beit Hashem B'Yerach Ziv. In the 4th year, the house of God was established or given a foundation in the month of Ziv, which is Iyar. Ushana Chatasrei B'Yerach Bul, in the 11th year, in Yerach Bul, which is Cheshvan, Hu HaChodesh HaShmini, it's the 8th month. Habayit l'chol dvarav v'l'chol mishpatav v'yivnei sheva shanim. Built for 7 years, right? So it started in the 4th year of Shlomo's reign, and he builds it over a period of 7 years. So it gets finished in the 11th year. Okay, for our purposes, what we're going to concentrate on, so we want to concentrate on is the Kruvim, and this issue exactly where it doesn't tell us where they were standing. It just says that they're placed in such a way that their wings go from wall to wall. So in the little illustration that I did on the white, I just I said maybe they go from the north wall to the, but it doesn't say that. Another question is, where exactly were the doors that went veer into the Kodesh HaKodeshim? Were they in? So when we, maybe our default imagination is that they're in the middle, but maybe they're not in the middle. Maybe they're to one side or to the other side. It's not, again, it's not clear. And so far we haven't here discussed the Aron per se. That is discussed in Perek Chet. As I mentioned earlier, the Perek is actually a discussion of Shlomo's palace, of his residence, and then it'll back to matters of the Beit Hashem Perek Chet. So next week we're going to examine some other psukim in Perek Chet and maybe also in Divrei Yamim, and then I'll show you what the Gemara says about this issue with the Kruvim and also the Aron. So as a spoiler alert, but I think this is again something that came up already in this year. The Gemara says that the Kruvim and the Aron in the Beit HaMikdash of Shlomo, well, actually, it says the Kruvim and Aron is actually in the Mishkan. B'neis hayu omdim, they stood by way of a miracle. And apparently what that's in this context, as we will see, is that they were there, but they weren't there. They were there, but didn't take up any space at all. And we'll see how Chazal understand from the psukim, but I'm not. That's just the introduction. But we have to get into that. If anybody is interested, I'll send you the. If you want to look ahead at the Gemara yourself, I'll be happy to send it to you. Or I can just tell you now the sugya in Baba Batra. This is the most important sugyas for this particular question is the sugya in Baba Batra, and it starts on Tzadi Chet Amud Bet and spills over into Tzadi Tet Amud Aleph. And there's also Gemara that quotes part of it in Megillah Yud Amud Bet, and actually also our Gemara in Yoma, I think Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph brings it. So if you want to look ahead, you're more than welcome to look ahead.
Could you run those? Can you run the numbers sugya by us one more time?
Yeah. So the sugya in Baba Batra begins here on Daf Tzadichet Amud Bet. Tzadichet Amud Bet, and it's worth, if you have time, it's worth learning from them so you get the wider context. But the sugya that we're most interested in starts toward the end of Tzadichet Amud Bet with the words where is it? Hold on, covering up the part. It's a few lines from the end. It says, Rabbi Chanina nafak the Kiryata. Rabbi Chanina went out to the towns. And I'll just read the first part of it and you'll understand this is how it relates. We just learned. Rabbi Chanina nafak Kiryata, Ramu le krai ahe. So one of the towns, people threw one against each other two psukim. They're going to ask a kasha from two psukim. Ktiv, it says, "V'bayit asher bana hamelech Shlomo l'Hashem shishim amar kol mechbo v'shoshim amar komato." Right. So we saw this. This is the beginning of chapter 6. The house that Shlomo built was 60 amot by 20 amot by 30 amot in height. Uchtiv, and then later on in the same chapters, Lifnei Advir, Esrim ama orech, Esrim ama rocha, Esrim ama komato. Later on, when it describes the Kodesh HaKodeshim, it says it was 20 by 20 by 20. It should be by 30. And so that's where and from there he starts to give his ear, and this is where it gets into some of these issues that so if you have time, that's the sugya to look at first. I'm preparing it also as sheets, so if I get them done early enough, I will send them to you. Hope to get them done before Shabbos, but you never know. So just to finish off now in the last minute or two, again, the thing that was bothering me from the beginning is exactly when the Kohen Gadol goes into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and he has to do these things. He has to bring in the machteh with the Ktoret, and he has to down, right? He has to put it somewhere and then put the Ktoret on it. Exactly where does he place it? That's one thing. Exactly where is he standing when he is throwing the blood? And also exactly where does the blood go? We discussed that, but we have to go over it again. And one of the questions I'm wondering is, was there a difference between exactly where these things get placed, Ishkan, in Bayit Rishon, and of course in Bayit Sheni we know it's different because there is no Aron, right? But still we would want to know where he's standing. But I want to know, where is he standing and how does he get there exactly, taking into account that we have these badim sticking out of the Aron. As we'll see, the placement of the Aron in the Mishkan is not exact. It can't be exactly the same as the placement in Bayit Rishon, because the dimensions of the Bayit are different, right? The Mishkan is half the size of Beit HaMikdash Shel Shlomo. So we know that it's going to be different. But now we also have to contend with this question of the Kruvim, right? We have what apparently are very large Kruvim that are in Bayit Rishon. So I'm just trying to keep all this straight. I think we'll leave it here though. Any last questions or comments?
I just love this idea of the riffing on the Shamir, that this is a place where the soft has dominion over the hard.
Yeah.
That also plays out sort of in the in the interior being coated with these very soft materials. The wood and the gold, both which are very soft. And then you sort of visually soften it. It would make the texture soften. With acoustic, it would actually muffle sound. So it just sounds, it's a gorgeous idea on many, many different levels.
I'll try to get you, I'll try to make a note. I'll try to get you more reference about that. It's a very interesting concept. You're right. And I hadn't thought of it in all those ways. You're right, because we're starting with stone, which is whatever stone it is going to be hard. And then we have wood, and then gold, which is very soft and malleable. And it's as if it has dominion over everything else, because that's what you see. It covers everything else. The effect. I like that. Okay.
But also think that in relation to the whole concept of kapara, this is also this is also Beis HaKippurim, and sort of just like this. That's also like the soft. You're having covering, or having dominion over the hard. But maybe I'm just pushing that now.
No, actually, I think that fits in very well, because there is this idea that we want Hashem to have the midat harachamim to be more powerful than the midat hadin, right? So midat harachamim is the soft power, as it were. The midat hadin is the hard power, as it were. I think it fits in very well. I like that. I think it's very well done. Okay. Laila tov.
Laila tov. Bye bye.
תודה, לילה טוב.
Good night.